In today's political climate, many Americans are searching for examples of how to restore healthy civic engagement, the kind that strengthens communities, elevates human flourishing, and renews the bonds essential for constitutional self-government. Here in Utah, one such example might be closer than we think.
I would submit that if you looked at our institutions, our missions are more similar than they actually are different. We certainly serve a different constituent, but there are so much that we share.
It feels like a moment where we can, in fact, take our place as institutions where this really should be the laboratory for just such communications, just such dialogue that I think can be a model.
On this episode, I sit down with Brigham Young University President Shane Reese and University of Utah President Taylor Randall for a conversation about how these two different institutions work together for the common good, model true collaboration in a polarized age, and strengthen the foundation of civil society. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. This year, Sutherland Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary, thanks to all those who support the work we do for Utah and our great nation. Welcome to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and this week we're talking about major civic institutions. And to have this conversation, very excited to welcome into our studio two presidents of two of Utah's major universities, President Randall of the University of Utah, President Reese of Brigham Young University. Thanks so much for being with us on Defending Ideas.
Thanks
Nic,
for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Great to be here.
It's great to have you both, to have this conversation together, I think especially in the context of what feels like for many of us who follow issues in the public square, sometimes a contentious time. And I think something that we believe very firmly here at Sutherland is the importance of our civic institutions as sort of anchoring forces in our communities and in our state to help give shape and form to some things that we do together as a people. And so with both of you, I want to start out the conversation talking about the fact that BYU and the U are in some ways slightly different organizations. Of course, a faith-based institution at BYU, President Reese, and a state kind of secular institution, for lack of a better term, President Randall. So first, I want to ask you both, why do you think it's valuable for a state like Utah to have institutions that might have in some ways some distinct roles, but they do serve a higher purpose? How do you envision that?
Well, for us, I think that the whole landscape of higher education is vitally important. We view that the contributors to that in its various forms all across the state are so important. I'm bullish on higher education and its role in society, what it can do for people. Not only its earning potential, but an educated society is a society that understands civic dialogue. They understand exactly what makes for successful societies, and so whether it be our mission, which really does lean into both our faith and our academic pursuits, or whether it be our friends at the University of Utah or all around the state, this idea of education and what it can do for people to improve their lives, to improve the society that they live in, I'm bullish on that.
Nick, thanks for having us here, and it's always great to be able to share the stage with President Shane Reese. I have incredible admiration for what he is able to do at Brigham Young University. I would submit that if you looked at our institutions, our missions are more similar than they actually are different. We certainly serve a different constituent, but there are so much that we share. Interestingly, I want to take you back in history. Our founders were the same people. A set of settlers that came to Utah, and they said, you know what, we want to make a better society, a society that absolutely thrives. And they had actually run an experiment before they started either of our institutions in the city of Nauvoo. It was called the University of the City of Nauvoo. It was only around for 2 years, but they were so enthralled with the notion that an educated public is what you needed to have a productive society. It was one of the early things that they did. The University of Utah was actually founded well before Utah became a state. Now, our mission is much like that of BYU. We care deeply about students and human capital. And while they focus on a set of values that are espoused by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we also focus on teaching students values of democracy, values of free speech, values of virtue that we think will make our society better. And then I think the other thing that both of our institutions try to do is we actually try to transmit that knowledge and discover new knowledge. In fact, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but both of our institutions do some remarkable things for this state's economy because of the things that are discovered by our faculty and students.
I want to ask you both, how would you describe your respective institutions' unique strengths? Kind of what does the U bring to the table? What does BYU bring to the table? For Utah, yes, but also for the nation, just because of that the power of education, as both of you alluded to. So what are some kind of unique things that you bring to the table? And you can't talk about the football teams. I know it's a season for that. You might say, that's a great rivalry. But institutionally, in terms of education and all the great things you talked about, what's unique about both your institutions?
Yeah, well, for us, I think our faith-based mission puts us in a fairly unique category. One that has a distinct emphasis not only on faith and development of as we would call disciples of Jesus Christ, but also that we have this strong commitment to our academic mission. President Kimball, at the occasion of our centennial celebration at BYU, our 100th year, gave a remarkable address that really outlined what could be for BYU if we were willing to be unique as an institution. And so we're really committed to that. What that does for us is it permits us to have people who walk out of the university and are committed to both of those aims, both their development as academics, their development as people who excel in their field of choice, but also people who can lean into their faith. And I think that becomes one of the things that makes us unique. It's interesting. We were looking at the data on those serving in the legislature, the United States legislature, and BYU ranks up there with most of the Ivy Leagues in terms of the number of people serving in these public service positions. It is a remarkable thing when someone leaves and they have a distinct connection to their faith and to their academic pursuits. And so we see that as something that puts us in a fairly unique category. But as Taylor pointed out, the virtues and values that apply to both of our institutions are shared in some important respects. And so we really view this as a complementary kind of arrangement here in the state of Utah, and we love the connections that we've got.
I would say there are three things that really distinguish the University of Utah. The first is research, and that's with a capital R. So if you look at the research institutions in the public institutions in the state, they do 95% of the publicly funded research, federally funded research. If you add Brigham Young University, you get to 99%, and the U does about 2/3 of that. And so if you look at the basic discovery that we do, we are very much a research institution. The second thing is we're actually only one of 10 public universities that also has a healthcare system attached to it. And so we do millions of patient visits a year. We believe that is part of our mission to serve the state, is actually to very much emphasize the tertiary and quaternary care, the sophisticated cases that need to be done. And in fact, our healthcare system serves about 10% of the landmass of the United States as an academic medical center. And then I think the third thing that somewhat distinguishes us from Brigham Young University is that we are a pluralistic university. And we hope we're a university where religion does not hide in the shadows, given where we are, that it is actually brought to the forefront. But we certainly represent in a space where all religions are welcome.
Can I build on that for...
As do you, by the way.
Thank you.
So sorry. I didn't want that to come off as they're not welcome at Brigham Young University, but that is our unique role.
Yeah.
Well, it actually ties into what I was going to ask, is that I think there is a lot of debate in society these days about the role of faith, broadly speaking, in public life and whether it has a place in public life. We here at Sutherland Institute, of course, say unequivocally that it's an important aspect of American life. It is essential in so many ways, at the very least from the standpoint of religious freedom protections in law. We had in a past episode of Defending Ideas, Ibu Patel on the show from Interfaith America, and he very artfully described this idea of, we often talk about America as being a melting pot. His articulation of it is really it's a potluck, that we all have something unique to add, and I want to ask both of you that through the lens of the role of faith in our public-facing institutions and public life, and how you think of that as an asset for our society through kind of your respective lenses with these different institutions.
What's been interesting for me about examining faith and the life of a student who expresses their faith at the University of Utah it has been to really view it through the lens of this potluck that Ibu Patel describes. We have these differences that if we bring them up and we allow people to talk about them, you quickly realize that there are strengths that you can build on. Almost every faith tradition, right, believes that faith can actually enhance intellectual inquiry. Almost every faith tradition believes in the golden rule. And when you think about conflict, and often conflict can arise on campuses, we lean into that, right? We lean into faith as being something that brings us all together. And so though on our campus we have individuals of different faiths, we try to focus on the commonalities and what can actually bring us together. And for us, we hope that faith and the practice of different faiths on our campus is something that brings unity to our campus.
Yeah, and I would just say that this is a great question. I think far too often we find ourselves in a place where we've been taught and framed this idea of separation of church and state, and we think that has to apply to every aspect of our existence. One of the three research initiatives that we sponsor institutionally at the university at BYU are family, the Constitution and the inspired Constitution, and then lastly, religion or faith and human flourishing, and what faith and human flourishing does for society. We view those as the three core institutions of society. And if you have a high-functioning, successful society, those three institutions have to be highly functioning. One of the things we found through some of the research that's been done at BYU coming out of especially our Wheatley Institute is the idea that when you allow for and cultivate a healthy sense of faith in the workplace, which is a place where there isn't real restrictions from being able to express your faith, that actually results in bottom line performance. We've also found some incredible research done recently by Pew talking about retention rates among various religions. And one of the things that is very notable there is while we hear about the decline of faith among a younger generation, the group in this Pew study that had the least retention was the religious nuns. That we often talk about kind of the hemorrhaging that's happening in these various faith traditions, but the religious nuns are having the hardest time keeping their people, and ultimately I think what that means is that I think there is a hungering for faith within the American public, and regardless of your faith tradition, this initiative for us really is independent of faith tradition. It's talking about what ways can people of faith be a benefit to society. And boy, the data and evidence just continues to pour in for that needing to be a part of what we do as a society and as a country.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into specific areas of collaboration between the two universities. Where do you guys work together? Kind of what are some of the results of that for Utah and for the nation? So we'll dive into that and more. Again, this is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit SutherlandInstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn, and we're going to continue our conversation about two of Utah's universities and the role they play in society in various ways. But first, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit defendingideas.org. You can also find us wherever you like to get your shows, like on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the Sutherland Institute YouTube channel and make sure you click the bell icon on your screen there so you get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, all of that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. I want to continue the conversation because in the first segment, you both did a great job of sort of saying, here's sort of the way that our institutions, BYU and the University of Utah, have sort of distinct missions in some regards, but there's a lot of shared goals in some very important ways. And you also have actually partnered together, the two universities, in some really explicit ways. So I want to start off by tell our audience, what are some of the areas where both of you, your universities, really do partner together in really substantive ways?
Well, you ask a question like this of a statistician, and I immediately am going to start quoting statistics.
This is why I'm letting him go first.
One of the things we do is we try to look at all of the people that we play sporting events with in the Big 12. And one of the things we recently did was an audit of the number of publications that we shared with all the institutions. And over the last 5 years, we have an average of 75 publications a year that are co-authored with the University of Utah colleagues. So that is a non-trivial number of publications that we collaborate on. I think over a pretty substantial amount of time, that's resulted in about 1,400 publications co-authored with the University of Utah colleagues. It is a remarkable connection that we have in so many different areas of expertise. And what I love is that they're just so complementary. We've got strengths down at BYU, and the University of Utah has incredible strengths. And I think it just is a great example of colleagues who are proximal to one another, who find great ways to collaborate, and some specific examples that are just right off the top because they're recent. I know that we have colleagues who work together on trying to find more energy efficient ways to use biomass. So things that would be considered garbage to the rest of us, they find ways to turn that into efficient energy sources. It's a remarkable effort that's been ongoing for years and years, and the strength between the two institutions is remarkable. And something that just recently happened that we couldn't be more thrilled about. As you know, we've announced a School of Medicine at BYU. We're working towards being accredited, but the collaboration that has existed between BYU and the Huntsman Institute, Cancer Institute, has been remarkable. It's provided incredible opportunities for our scholars. It's provided incredible opportunities for our students to really put into practice some of the things that they've learned. And we have a very small cancer institute, the Simmons Institute, that has just a great relationship with the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And we feel like those are just two of a remarkable number of collaborations. The U has been just an amazing relationship for us when it comes to the research endeavors at BYU.
I think let me take a step up from kind of the individual collaborations that go on. I've got the same statistics. I must have gotten them from you. So anyway, we share statistics as well. If you look, for example, at Silicon Slopes and the incredible economic engine, and I think both of us go and look at founders of companies and the number of individuals that come from both of our institutions that are in those companies, I think you could make a strong argument that not for BYU and the University of Utah and the heart of Silicon Slopes is almost equidistant from our two front doors. You would say, that economic engine is something that we may not have explicitly collaborated on, but the fact that entrepreneurship is a team sport, that drives, I think, the growth engine of the state of Utah, particularly in the tech sector. And it's interesting. I think our different alumni have different areas of focus. Yours have been really remarkable in areas of data and marketing, ours in financial technology. But almost every one of those founder companies have graduates from our two institutions, and so I think that's something we should not lay aside. I, like Shane, am extremely excited about their new medical school, and also I think the collaborations that we think will go on there. We are opening in a number of years a new cancer center in Utah Valley, and if I could be a little more specific about those collaborations, there are at least 5 different deep collaborations that are going on between our institutions. And what has been remarkable to me is these teams get together, they look at the strengths of each institution, and one institution will take the lead when they have a strength. I think about proteomics. I had to look up that word before coming here. But deep depth at Brigham Young University in this area, but you combine that with some of the data sources at Huntsman Cancer Institute, and magic happens. On the other side, we have incredible kind of biostatistics depth as well, and we see capstone projects with nearly 30 students from BYU coming and using Huntsman Cancer Institute and making us better as an institution. And so those kind of things I think are going to flourish in the future, and we're excited about the future of collaboration between our two institutions.
I'll also add that it's fascinating when you look at the two leaders of the medical school at the University of Utah and our newly appointed dean at BYU. They've got a BYU grad leading their School of Medicine, and we've got a University of Utah grad. That was not by design, but we couldn't imagine a kind of a better symbiotic opportunity for the two institutions to collaborate.
Agreed.
That's a great way to frame the collaboration. I want to read very briefly just 2 quick excerpts from articles from both your respective schools. I think these are both in 2024, but about the new BYU Medical School, a statement from the University of Utah News saying, quote, "University leaders affirm that BYU's internationally focused health education plans complement University of Utah Health's state-focused mission and offer new opportunities to serve growing healthcare needs locally and around the world." So this is very much beyond just the state of Utah. And then another link from BYU News saying that BYU professors co-authored a staggering 1,388 publications with colleagues at the University of Utah alone. So again, kind of bolstering that. There's so much exchange of knowledge and expertise in both directions that in some ways is kind of staggering. That, well, for sure on the sports field at times, there's this sense of rivalry. Universities all, of course, recruit students, want students to come there. But even so, there's such a spirit of collaboration. And I want to ask you both about this concept of thinking differently but acting together. It's a concept we've heard often from Yuval Levin, American Enterprise Institute scholar. We've had him participate with Sutherland on a number of fronts over the years, big fan of his work. And he uses that term of acting together while thinking differently as sort of a model for restoring civic health as a nation. When you hear that term, that phrase, how do you think that applies to what you two do with your respective universities?
I'm a big believer that if you bring two individuals together that have different strengths, and by definition that means they've spent a lot of time developing those strengths independent of each other, that 1 + 1 equals more than 2. And to me, that's the essence of, I think, what we're trying to do at a researcher level between our two institutions. There are just so many strengths that you can point at in each of our incredible universities that if we're able to match those individuals and they find passion for a problem that is common to humanity, we're going to see just remarkable innovation. And to me, it's that innovation that gets rid of the trade-offs that we all hate to face on a daily basis, right? I want to have my cake and I want to eat it too. And it is innovation and discovery that allows us to happen. And we've just got to create an environment so people can thrive in that.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Taylor just said. One of the things that we've always felt is that we have colleagues all the time at BYU who drive to the airport, hop on a plane to go collaborate with somebody all around the country, why wouldn't we just drive up to the airport and be right next to the University of Utah? There are so many places where I think that we have complementary things that really do lead to the 1 + 1 is greater than 2 mentality. And in the end, I think that the engine that drove the formation of Silicon Slopes was really that very thing. It was, hey, we have got an absolute surge of intellectual power, entrepreneurial spirit in this state, in this very small hour kind of vicinity of one another. We don't need to go outside to just build on that strength. In fact, what's happened is we've seen at Silicon Slopes in particular, if you build it, they will come. We're seeing people pour into the state, not only human capital, but also resources and other things that see the energy and enthusiasm that the sort of beehive state itself has really cultivated. It's an amazing thing, and these two institutions are a huge part of what we're seeing happening in that area.
Yeah, the remarkable byproduct of all of our universities is Utah has the third most educated workforce in the country, right? That is a rare commodity that allows economics and civil society to thrive.
We need to take another quick break. When we come back, I want to build a little bit more on this idea of civil society. And you both talked a little bit about kind of the role of faith and pluralism and kind of as a virtue of public life. So I want to expand on that a little bit as we come back. Again, this is Defending Ideas. We've been talking with the presidents of the University of Utah and Brigham Young University. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn, and we're going to continue our conversation with President Reese and President Randall of two of Utah's major universities. But before we continue, I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, if you're enjoying this conversation, please subscribe to Defending Ideas. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like to get your podcasts. Just search for Defending Ideas and click that subscribe button. And if you prefer watching, you can find us on Sutherland Institute's YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe and click the little bell icon at the bottom of your screen so you can get notified each time a new episode drops, which is every Tuesday morning. Again, all of that and more wherever you get your shows or at defendingideas.org. So the last thing I want to ask you is sort of this idea of extrapolating what we're talking about into broader civil society. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I think this conversation really comes at an important time in our society, not just as a state, but as a nation, because there is so much consternation and contempt and vitriol and anger towards one side or the other. And so many of the conversations we have here on Defending Ideas are so often about how to restore the muscle memory of what good civic self-government means. And based on what you guys are all saying, I think that seems to be sort of a core aspect of the mission of both the University of Utah and Brigham Young University. And I want to ask you specifically about this idea of, as we alluded to before, sort of the role of faith and pluralism in a public, very pluralistic society. And maybe, President Randall, starting with you, especially when you look at it through the lens of a state university at the University of Utah, what does it look like on campus to accommodate the interests and beliefs of religious students at a place like the U?
You know, we realized very early on, probably because we're founded by the founders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we're located miles from its headquarters, that many, many of our students wanted to have dialogues about religion. And so we leaned on Eboo Patel, the founder of Interfaith America, to try to help us with our interfaith program. He has been remarkable in terms of training students of how they can dialogue. We'll have nearly 2,000 students trained in dialogue across different areas of religious diversity. And, you know, that same training around religious differences is also easily applied to any other difference that we might have. And our hope is that we lean into the positiveness that can come from religious belief and faith, because it is fundamentally about hope in future and confidence in our own futures. And if we can do that, it creates a really remarkable environment on a campus where learning becomes at the forefront, and at the same time there is remarkable debate around ideas.
President Reese, a similar question, but for a religious university, how do you prepare students? I guess it could be a similar question based on what President Randall said earlier, that their pluralism still exists on BYU campus. So I guess I'd ask kind of the same question to you, but also with the angle of the students at BYU who are of the faith of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. How do you prepare students to then go out into the world where they may or may not be part of a majority faith? How do they engage in, again, this pluralistic constitutional society that we're in? How do you anchor them for that in the future?
Well, one of the things that we feel super strongly about at BYU is this idea that we have a board of trustees. It was chaired by the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so a big part of our charge as a university is that we help to sort of model, to help teach and train the next generation of people who can actually implement some of the things that say President Nelson would say. And boy, I cannot think of a more timely message than his call for the world, really, not just members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to be peacemakers. I remember I was in the conference center when he gave that address, and I remember thinking, this is a timely address for the world. And this was really even before some of the vitriol we've seen in recent years. And so we feel it a very significant responsibility as an institution to teach a generation of people who do understand how to have more dialogue rather than just monologue. A group of people who really understand what it is to be peacemakers, obviously not peacemaking at all costs, that we need to be able to have disagreement, but we need to learn how to do that in a more civil way. I certainly have great appreciation for the governor of our state for trying to talk to us about how to disagree better. That these all come at a cost in today's society. But I think it takes courage to have people who are willing to stand up and to say, yeah, we want to be peacemakers, and we want to hold strong to our ideals, and those two things aren't separate from one another, that we can have both of those things. I think at times those get pitted as competing ideals that have to be chosen between, and that there's a balance. But I think what we really need to do as a society is have a better sense about how to live both of those ideals more fully.
Can I expand on that for a minute? Because I think it ties in so much to, honestly, the mission of this show, of defending ideas, and so much of what we do here at Sutherland Institute. And as you said, President Reese, what Governor Cox has tried to establish through the Disagree Better initiative. And I think just really what our civic culture needs is what you're saying. And as you mentioned, President Nelson of the Church of Jesus Christ, that talk about being peacemakers, I want to ask you both, how do we do that? Because I think of it in terms of, I view universities largely as microcosms of society, right? That people come with all kinds of different experiences and ideas, and there are a lot of differences, but they're there for a shared purpose of, and I wrote down what you guys were saying earlier, this idea of conveying values, very, very much American values, broadly speaking, and sharing knowledge. But there are still differences, and I think back to my time in college with really robust debates, whether it's politics or religion or whatever else. And I love that. I love that kind of constructive, vigorous debate. And so I want to ask you both, from your perspectives, how can all of us do what you're saying, President Reese? Number one, be really good at articulating what I believe and why I believe it's a good thing, and also doing it in such a way that strives to be a peacemaker. That seems really, really hard to balance. Almost none of us get it right. How do we do it?
So The quote I like is from one of our scholars. We have to teach students to be architects of a better system, not arsonists of the current one. We have a set of public impact scholars that come to our university, and they center themselves around a single value. And by the way, we share these scholars back and forth. We get ideas from Brigham Young University, and we get to benefit from the people they invite, and we hopefully they benefit from some of the folks that we invite. But I want to give just a shout out to Tim Shriver. Tim Shriver, of course, leads the Special Olympics movement, and he told a really interesting story, because what he talks about is begin first with showing dignity for others. And he tells a story of the Special Olympics. They had handed out one-use cameras to all of the Special Olympians so that they could take pictures of President Clinton, who was going to be speaking at the opening ceremonies. And when they looked down, all of the athletes were looking through the camera the wrong way. At least that's what they perceived. And all of a sudden they were shocked and scared. They said, "Oh my goodness, that's not the way they should be using those cameras." And a number of the staff ran down and said, No, you've got to turn the cameras around. And the athlete said, "You don't get it. If you look through the cameras the other way, you can see the president better." And they discovered in that moment that if you give someone a moment to explain where they're coming from and give them that dignity, right, we will begin with a foundation of building a better society. And the arsonist suddenly begins to listen. And I think for me, that is the foundation of what we have to provide our students, is a place of dignity where they can disagree and dialogue.
And for us, I'll just say, and I think this is true for most institutions, although they may not be able to articulate as much, the fact that we claim to believe that we are all children of God. And if that is true, it changes the nature of the conversation. It changes how you look at the person across the way from you. And it changes the dignity, really, with which you approach them in these conversations. One of the things I should say right off the top, we're not doing this perfectly or even well yet. We have a lot of work to do on college campuses nationwide, not the least of which is BYU. We were supposed to be the place where these kinds of ideas could be cultivated and explored. And candidly, I don't think we've done a great job at it. And so we have work to do within higher education of trying to be the microcosm that you spoke about.
But we also have to remember that we get a new batch of several thousand students every year, and we actually start that process over again every single year.
Absolutely. So it feels like a moment where we can, in fact, take our place as institutions where this really should be the laboratory for just such communications, just such dialogue, that I think can be a model for society in general. But we got work to do, it feels like.
Agreed.
Last question. We're about at time, but I want to ask you both very briefly. Maybe number one, what's next for both of you universities, for the world of higher ed in general? What needs to happen to achieve that goal, President Reese? And number two, what advice would you give for folks watching or listening out there who hear this and say, this sounds great, but it's really hard to put this into practice? So what's next? Give us some advice or words of encouragement briefly as we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll just take a moment. It was interesting. I was with a gathering of 100 presidents from around the country where we were talking about how do we build trust in higher education. And there was a set of panelists, about 8 panelists, and 7 of the panelists all had something to say that was very similar in spirit. And it was essentially, we need to tell our story better, and we need to tell our story louder. And there was on this panel a sage old chancellor who, after those other panelists had all articulated the same idea in different words, he stood back and he said, I actually think and I mean this as respectfully as I can, that they're absolutely wrong. And I remember the entire room kind of stopped and got silent, and he said, I think what we need is a little more humility. And I think that for us as an institution, how do we build trust in higher education? I think there's some fair criticism of higher education. And I think we need to have a healthy sense of humility as we approach some of where we need to improve and also what we have to offer and to be listeners. I actually am bullish on higher education and what it does for civil society. And I think we also have room to grow and to learn and to get better.
President Randall, you have the last word.
You know, I think my thoughts are very similar. When I think about the lack of confidence right now in higher education, I think we've lost alignment with our constituents. And the only way you get that back is by listening and responding. And I would echo what President Reese said. You've got to be humble about it. You've got to recognize that we have some problems that we can correct and we can address. And then as we're doing that, and this is probably, I think, the thing I've learned most as a president is I have to prioritize relationships over ideologies. I have to care fundamentally about the human being first, and then I can talk ideas with them. I have to care that they need to thrive, and I need to thrive after our interaction is over. And I'm hoping that the University of Utah becomes an institution that drives incredible societal impact in the state, but we start by listening and focusing on relationships with individuals.
Well, we will have to leave it there. I really appreciate both of you just for everything you do for the respective schools, for the state of Utah, and for our country, and really appreciate your time here on Defending Ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
We're going to take one final break before we leave you with some final talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. And thanks again to President Randall of the University of Utah and President Reese of Brigham Young University. There are two big things that stood out to me from this conversation that I think you and I can try to emulate in our conversations about any tough issues we might have moving forward. The first is the sense of humility. Now, neither of these guys were arguing to not remain true to your convictions, but it was striking to me that they both understood the importance of always learning. In other words, I might describe it as the sense of continuous improvement. They both recognized the potential and the opportunity for their universities to grow and become better at accomplishing the aspirational mission before them. And I think that you and I can apply that to our own lives. How can we have a dose of that same humility with the recognition that we are also still always learning and on the path to being better participants in American constitutional self-government? The second big takeaway is the importance of faith in public life. Whether leading a private faith-based university or a secular official state university, both of these presidents recognize that faith, broadly speaking, has an important role to play in society and public life, both in terms of equipping people to live their values and serve others, and in fostering a culture of true, respectful pluralism. I think we can take some lessons from their example of collaboration under shared aspirational goals and apply that to our own lives anytime we see the opportunity. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.